I'm going to read a piece called The House. The house. Restrict. Cigarette between slender fingers, the porch swing is a dance, back and forth. She stares as she sways, every dip in the land, height of the planted corn, line of light across each seed, familiar. The air moves this Midwest ocean, changing colors, patterns. Time is told by the light, the motion. She is restricted to this movement, back and forth. Breathe. He stood slowly that morning, holding his lower back. Time was told by his movements. Air fresh from the corn except for manure, coffee, tobacco. They would sell some of the land, but not a lot. After all this time, after all this work, it would be like giving up. She lay her head against his shoulder, inhaled his breath, stale pipe smoke, and salami on rye. Silence. White robe around shriveled frame, empty coffee mug dangles from fingers. The skin on her hands is thin, her veins thick blue tubes. The sun, barely rising, illuminates the land with a hue she can't tolerate again and again. The screen door leans against the house, part of the earth after years of silence. A musty smell escapes through the door around her, and she wonders if it has always been this way. She combines the creaking of the porch swing with the wind, far-off cattle, and even sometimes the distant sound of a car on gravel. She creates her own music to shield herself from the overwhelming silence, counts the minutes it takes for the sun to position itself above that patch of trees, the patch of trees still hiding him. Pull. She heard a crash across the land. Morning light shook the shadows the patch of tree offered, like relief on that harsh plain. She ran toward the patch of trees, corn thrashing her body, out to find the tractor flipped on its side. He was twisted underneath, his arm, hand reaching out, his face staring. She grabbed his hand and tried to pull. His cough gurgled blood onto the brown earth. She laid down next to him, frantically wiping the blood out of his mouth, away from his face. She had only been able to murmur no. He had only been able to stare. She had to leave him, to call for help, but he took his last breath while she was away. When they lifted the tractor, silent shaking, she crawled on top of him. Change. She stares through the house, from the dining room to the living room to the fireplace on the back wall. The chair still curves to the heavy form of his body. His cowboy hat perched on the shelf still holds the same roundness of his head. His pipe tastes of his lips, smells of his breath, his mouth. They all take on a different hue, shape, meaning. His objects, him, kept as if in a shrine, now remind her instead of the blood on the grass. She wants to remember more, to hold his face in her memory's hand and caress it as she had throughout the years. But time plays evil tricks on love's shadows, and now these tangible memories in her house seem just as easily lost. The dark wooden table in the dining room, set for four, only ever sat with two. The fireplace burning orange, that pipe, his pipe. She looks into the dark of the house, made even darker with the rising sun. She can't take the silence, the shadows, as if the breeze touches everything, moves from outside to in, changing everything to nothing. Crumple. She sat at the bottom of the stairs on the ground in front of the white-peaked house. They had walked all around her, moving from beyond that patch of trees, through the house, down to the police cars and the ambulance. She looked like a crumpled doll, one leg out front, the other curled in, her hands, palms up on her lap, his blood crusted on her dress, hair, face. Taste. She moves to the table and reaches out frail fingers to remove a layer of dust, but her fingers move right through it. Everything is disappearing. His hat, a couch cushion, the curved chairs. She moves through the house, arms outstretched, touching the shadows of her furniture, his bowling trophy, her painting of the barn, climbing to touch the elk light fixture, moving to touch his favorite recliner, bending to touch the stain on the carpet by the door from his muddy boots, all dissolving around her. She pushes around then solid objects now turned air, so chair molds into hat and table becomes part rug. She mixes them together and sucks them into her mouth to have one last taste. Stay. The blood had not washed from the grass, even with the flooding. It always remained. She shouldn't have pulled his arm. She knew that now. She had wondered what he was thinking when all his words were choked in his mouth from gurgling blood, words only released with his eyes. She wondered if he had begged her with those eyes for her to stay as she ran back through that patch of trees. She should have stayed. She knew that now. Look. She turns slowly in circles. She can see miles upon miles in every direction. Everything around her, everything she held dear, that the gray gravel they had driven over, the corn that had fed them, the trees that had offered shade, the barn, even the white house that allowed their small world to be all their own, was all her enemy, his enemy. It had done nothing to protect him, comfort her. She looks to her left, down to the large tree curled and dying, and moves instead into the cornfield, her robe flowing behind her. She walks with hands outstretched, touching every stalk. Leave. At that patch of trees, she looks back to plumes of memory dust where the house had been. All that is left is the porch swing and the low burning orange from the fireplace. She walks through the trees to find where he is hiding. She hadn't been back since she had laid on top of him in silent shaking. She finds the grass just as it had been, plucks a blade, and removes the blood with her finger. Thank you.